all you can and you're running with kings. But how far could you go if you run with the wind? And the chances you take are what give you wings, and you can fly.
Hello there, I'm Lew Bayer. Welcome to Consider Civility. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what a tool that we call the Civility Iceberg, Civility Indicators Iceberg to be specific. And this is I'll pop my face out of here in a minute so that you can see the depiction. But this is a tool that we devised, the Civility Experts team, I guess late 2019. And we use it in training situations. It's referenced in a couple of our books. For those of you who do work in the field where one of the primary objectives of teaching civility or effective communication skills, leadership, change readiness, all of the topics related to civility, it may well be that one of the desired outcomes is to change the workplace culture. And so this particular graphic, which has been used for years and years, I think I first experienced it in a training situation when I was taking a cultural competence course, and the concept, the metaphor of an iceberg, what's above the water and what's below the surface, is a well-worn metaphor in many different, many different training situations and related to different topics. So we have adapted it for our purposes to talk about civility, and particularly incivility in the workplace. So I'm just going to get rid of my face and we'll pop up the iceberg for you. Just one moment here. Here we go. Let me see if I can get myself right out of there completely. Let's see. Almost. Okay, there we go. So, as you can see here, we have the Civility Iceberg Indicators chart. So what happens is that when you look at a workplace culture that is uncivil, so for example, maybe your preliminary assessment showed that there were multiple indicators of incivility in the workplace. So we try to understand, how does that come to be? What is at the root of all of that incivility? And so sometimes we'll look, at the workplace culture. We'll tour an organization. We'll interview the team. We'll look at workplace assessments. Have they done engagement surveys or trust assessments? Where are they at in terms of the day-to-day culture? What do they already think that they know? And so some of the things we look at are, how are people dressing? So in organizations that are union, for example, we're going to look at how frequently do people follow the guidelines related to PPE. If it's a work casual dress code, we're going to look at how often do people dress more casually than maybe they're allowed. Sometimes that's an indication of overall happy at work or pride in the job that people are doing and so forth. We'll look at who makes up the organization. What are the demographics? Race, gender, age, experience, education. Are most people driving in from a distance, or are they living downtown? Those kind of things. We want to know, how do people interact, including with whom and how often. So we might actually observe and see, does business unit A interact with business unit D most of the day or not at all? Or do all the business units overlap? What's inter-team and cross-team communication like, that kind of thing. We'll look at, are there cliques or clusters? What kind of hierarchy exists in the workplace? We'll look at what the people in the organization do exactly. Is a lot subcontracted out? What are the daily job tasks and job descriptions and functions that we see in the workplace? So keep in mind, again, that this is all observation. This is not, you don't have to dig very deep. It's just living in the workplace for a little while, asking questions. We want to talk about what gets done. What are the metrics for productivity, for error rates, for overall quality, increase in business services, what's customer service complaint roster like, those kind of things. We're going to look at something that might seem obvious, but it's the overall demeanor. What is the mood of the workplace? Does it feel tense and I haven't even talked to anybody yet? Is there kind of a lightness? Are people smiling and saying hello when I walk by? Are they looking kind of fearful about who is this now, coming to spy on us? So we're going to look at, how excited are people about answering questions if you stop and ask them. We're also going to look at overall standards. So is culture, meaning the day-to-day experience of people in the workplace, which is a definition by Masadi and Bayer. I believe we first used it in the Manufacturing Civility book that came out in 2019. But you can define organizational culture in all kinds of ways. And from a civility point of view, we define it in terms of the daily experience of the people who live in that culture. So often we hear what the culture is supposed to be like or what leadership says it is like, but in reality, workplace culture is defined by the people that live and work in that culture every day. And so it's their experience that tends to be a better reflection of what the workplace culture actually is. So then once we have all of that information, we assess it a little bit. We try to uncover, what seem to be some trends or are there patterns emerging. And then we want to look at what's possibly creating those patterns or what's the root cause. What's under the surface? What is it that we're not seeing? And so we're going to look a little closer and see how things like legislation or regulation, for example, in a regulated industry, sometimes the culture is defined a little bit by the laws and regulations. We're going to look at organizational policy. So some people don't understand that, in fact, policy, process, and procedures can sometimes encourage incivility. And so we want to look at the organizational policies and processes and see, is this actually directing how people behave, and is it potentially harming more than it is helping? Financial situations, so organizations that are potentially experiencing layoffs or downsizing. In this pandemic, we've experienced a lot of hardship for workplaces. Balancing the financial budgets can be stressful, and sometimes those kind of conditions and factors under the surface can certainly impact temperament and day-to-day experience. We're going to look at external conditions like a recession or a pandemic. We're going to look at demographics. The labor pool, what's accessible in terms of labor pool in the general area or in that sector or by position, etc. We're going to look at competencies, specifically of the leadership team. So frequently, if there are issues in terms of key metrics, it has more to do with leadership's ability to direct and manage the team than it does initially with a will or an attitude or demeanor of the team. So for example, even where conditions might suggest that a workplace culture would be negative, where there is strong leadership, we can turn that around, and that happens often. And it's pretty easy to pinpoint, actually. We're going to look at stakeholder interests. We're going to look at expectations for compliance and what does performance review look like? How rigid are we with holding people accountable? We're going to look at the history of the business and of the organization, of the sector. What's happening with our competitors? Is there poor quality control, and has that sort of become the nature of things? What are the safety standards, and are we adhering to those? For example, oftentimes we see if people are behaving badly, you could even say getting even with the organization. Sometimes that's because they are not feeling safe psychologically, physically, emotionally, financially, and so there's some things we can address there. Management style and approach. Sadly, sometimes there is just one person with a lot of power or a small cohort of people with a lot of power who can make or break the day-to-day experience in the workplace. And so the way that indicator works is that it's meant as sort of a starting point for conversation. Most people are happy to identify that there's incivility, and they're happy as well to point the finger or lay blame, and often that's related to these indicators that you see above the surface. And so if we actually require that, whether it's HR or leadership or our consulting team, pause for a moment and actually dig a little deeper, sometimes we can see that incivility at work is not a people problem as much as it's a problem related to some of those bigger indicators that lie under the surface. So I hope that this was helpful to you. There are many, many ways to adapt the iceberg, and I'm sure if you're a corporate trainer, you can already see how this could become a discussion group activity. You could ask people to list what they perceive to be indicators above and below the surface on flip charts before you post the iceberg graphic. You could turn it into a full day, once you've identified, and if you can find some common ground about what are the key indicators, you can work in a problem-solving way to try to identify how we can address those indicators and change our workplace culture so that it can be more positive. If you have questions, you can certainly send an email to events@civilityexperts.com and just put Civility Indicator Question in the subject line, and one of our admin or support team can get back to you. If you want to talk to me about this, I'm Lew, L-E-W, @civilityexperts.com. Our site is civilityexperts.com. We have all kinds of great online training, civilityexpertsonline.com. And don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope that you'll consider civility and also liking these individual videos and subscribing to our channel. Thanks very much. Please take a moment as well to look below in the description and click through, if you're so inclined, to hear the full version of the Isabelle Song, which plays at the beginning of all of our Civility YouTube clips. It's a song that was written by a colleague and mentor of mine. Her name is Beth Crookham. She was co-founder of the Civility Center, and she was really the reason that I went to Rwanda in 2019 and experienced the incredible resilience and humanity and forgiveness and compassion and civility of what seemed to be a whole nation. And I had the privilege of meeting Isabelle, about whom the song is written, and she founded Solid Africa, which is an incredible mindful endeavor, and I hope that you'll click through and learn a little bit more about that. Thanks so much for choosing Civility, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
Reason why each of us comes to this earth, and your actions will always speak louder than words, and you'll never know what you're capable of until you try.